I've experienced many odd and unexplainable events in my life, but this event has been on my mind for a few years now, and I finally decided to tell it, and pray I'm not the only one who's experienced something like this. So let's start from the beginning. I graduated from high school in 2019 and was promoted to supervisor for a kitchen in a nursing home down the street. Since I oversaw dinner, I didn't start work until about 3:30 p.m. and would get home around 10 p.m. So for the first half of the day I would be completely home alone. I enjoyed that time. Solitude was always nice, especially when you're as introverted as I am. Normally I would sleep in until about noon, but this time I decided to relax on the couch in our main living room and watch Kitchen Nightmares. I remembered nodding off and falling into a light sleep, so any small noise would wake me up. The first few times I cracked my eyes open, it would just be from the cats jumping on me. So when I felt the cushion by my feet dip a bit, I figured it was my cat Peach. After a moment, I opened my eyes and realized my younger sister was sitting at the end of the couch, her back to me. I was half asleep, so I really didn't think much of it. I figured she'd just stayed home from school sick. So I just asked her if she could move her head so I could see the TV, but she ignored me. Still facing the TV screen, annoyed, I asked her why she was home. Once again she remained silent, coming to the conclusion that she was just being rude. Again, I closed my eyes and fell back asleep. After about another hour, I got up and started to get ready for work, and noticed my sister wasn't in the room or in the house. Concerned, I called her. After trying to call her a few times and getting nothing, I called my mother. She picked up, and I asked her if Sis told her where she was going. My mother, confused, asked me what I was talking about. She dropped Sis off at school before going to work. My sister had been at school this whole time. In shock, I hung up and kept this to myself, convinced I was losing my mind, that it was all in my head. But I remember that moment so vividly. What my sister was wearing, how she was sitting, how I felt a shift in the couch when she sat down. This wasn't a dream. This was real. It had to be. There was something in my house with me that morning, and it was not my sister. I kept this experience to myself. As a kid, I had what my parents called a very active imagination, always seeing things, hearing things, and being easily spooked. So I think it got to the point where I just convinced myself this whole experience didn't happen, and that there was some rational explanation. It actually took me a few years to tell my little sister about this. Once again, mostly out of fear of being perceived as crazy. And I didn't want to spook my sister. But something she said to me changed that real fast. This takes place in September 2022. My sister and I were waiting in line for a ride at a local amusement park. Every year my dad's workplace would rent the whole park for employees and their families. We spent most of the day together as a family, but about an hour before closing SIS, and I went to the back of the park to ride some night rides, so it was just the two of us, and the waiting was getting terribly boring. Sis and I aren't very close and don't have much in common, so we struggled to have a conversation, and for the most part stood in silence, but out of the blue she spoke up. "Kat, want to hear something freaky?" As a lover of all things spooky, that caught my attention, so I immediately replied with an eager yes, and a part of me wishes I said no. My sister is a night owl, and over the summer would stay up until 6 a.m. I had just started working a different job after quitting my nursing home position. That's another scary story for a different day. So I was starting to go to bed at 12 a.m. every night and would be up around 10 a.m. So she would be the only one awake. One night, she noticed light coming from the crack in her bedroom door, and she heard both my voice and our mother's voices talking. Only it was hard to understand, as if we were either speaking too quickly or just complete gibberish. She quickly grabbed her phone, checking the time, and her confusion only grew when she noted it was 3 a.m. What were we doing awake? Sometimes my mom and I would go to the front window if the weather was bad during the night to keep an eye on the storm, or if there were sirens. We both have a habit of being very nosy. So she figured that's what was going on. After a few minutes, she could still hear the voices and still see the lights, growing curious. She got out of bed and opened her bedroom door and rushed into the hall, expecting to see me and my mother by the window talking. Only that's not what she saw. There were no lights on. It was completely dark besides the illumination from her phone screen, and there was no one in sight. Not our mother, not me. Not even the cats were out there, unsettled and confused. She turned to my bedroom door thinking I was messing with her. She opened my door, and I was asleep with both cats. She goes back in the hall. Mom and Dad's bedroom door is also shut. She peeks in there and both are sleeping. Now, my sister is a rational person. She was always the one to go in the basement first, tell the others that monsters and ghosts aren't real. So she completely pushed this event out of her mind, because in her eyes, it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she was just overtired, or our grandfather's TV downstairs was a bit loud, and that's what she heard. But like my own experience, this kind of sat at the back of her head, and the house grew to be a little less comfortable. She mentioned how after that, she felt like there was always someone watching, as if they were tucked in a corner just observing her. She wasn't scared out of her mind, just a bit confused. When she told me that a pit in my stomach opened up and I had chills, I laughed at first because, come on, we were in public and I didn't want to flip out. So we went on the ride, and for the remaining time, the park was open. We pushed that conversation on the back burner. On our way to meet up with our parents, we started talking about it again, and I finally told her about what happened to me. How I saw her at home that day, spoke to her, and could remember what she wore. That was the first time I saw her get scared. I wasn't home, she kept saying. What do you think it was then? We still don't know. We don't know if we want to know. The only thing we are sure of is there is something in our house. First off, a little backstory on my dad. The man has so much character and color to him. Though he is mostly a chilled-out grandpa at this point, whose biggest offenses are the likes of placing a box of dead kittens in the topic hat when the family plays charades at the Christmas Eve get-together. When I was a kid, he was a crazy person. He was an amazing father, honest to a fault, and had character made of stone. He apologized when he felt he was wrong, and he would sit and cry with you when things were eating away at your self-esteem. However, as much as I owe him my morality and compassion towards others, I also owe him my extremely demented and nothing is sacred sense of humor. The man got more joy from life in tormenting his children than anything else. We lived on my grandmother's farm in rural Tennessee, and when the power would go out, which happened a lot in our area, he would dare me to run to the mailbox and then lock me outside at 10 o'clock at night when I'm about 10 years old. And he would laugh so hard I could hear him over my screams while I banged on the door from the outside, pleading to be let back in. He was the type of dad to wake you up in the morning by revving a chainsaw, change the clocks in the house to make you get ready for school at 2 a.m., and stand on the front porch in his tighty-whities while you were getting on the bus in the morning and yell, "I love you! I'm gonna miss you so bad," in a voice that could only imply that he was suffering from severe brain damage. In other words, he was always looking for a way to scare you, embarrass you, or just make you have such a crazy, unexpected experience that you would be guaranteed to remember him forever. And it worked. I love that man. Now, that was needed for context, and this story takes place in my second to last year on my grandmother's farm. I was 17 and had been working a job in my small town stocking beer coolers and mopping floors at the local gas station. I was driving home from work in my little truck at about 10 p.m., and as I pulled into the driveway, my headlights shone up the hill to my grandmother's house and panned down the hill to the edge of our single-wide mobile home. I stopped immediately. All 4 tires in the driveway pointing straight to end of that straight stretch of gravel. I could see my dad, his old flatbed truck, and my stepmother's minivan were parked pointing to the left at the base of our trailer. He was standing behind them, with his back to my headlights. Our chocolate lab, Cassie, sat at his feet, staring intently at him, paying no attention to the vehicle entering her territory, which was highly unlike her. I only stopped because it was so late, and so unusual for my dad to be outside at this time. It was in the middle of the week. He was usually passed out in his recliner, wearing nothing but his underwear, with the History Channel quietly rambling on about the Civil War by this time. I slowly proceeded down the drive. Our driveway was about half a football field in length, and as I drove slowly toward the bottom of the drive, my dad began to walk, still with his back turned to me, and stepped behind the vehicles, the height of my stepmom's van fully concealing him. It took another 15 seconds from that point for me to reach the end of the drive, and I pulled my truck in on the side of his flatbed, leaving me closest to the road. I grabbed my big gulp and got out of the truck. "Dad?" No response. "Dad?" Still nothing. Immediately I got a bit creeped out, but then thought to myself nearly as quick, "This dude is trying to scare me again. He must think I didn't see him." I got down on my knee and peered under the vehicles. His left boot, unmistakable. Cassie's back legs and butt right beside him, tail tucked between her legs. I hollered out, "You're doing a crappy job of hiding, Dad. I can see your boot sticking out from behind the tire on the van." I watched as his left boot slowly slid to the right until it was concealed behind the tire with the other. Still, no response. I called for the dog. "Cassie?" She turned and literally scurried beneath the vehicles to get to me as if she was under heavy gunfire. She was whimpering when she got to me and acting very strange, as if she was terrified. She was acting how I would imagine a dog would act if they were constantly beat on, and I had never seen her behave that way before. When she got to me and I placed my hand on her, you could almost hear her breathe a sigh of relief. She was sticking to my legs like glue, and as I was still down on one knee and a bit off balance, she nearly knocked me over. I pet on her for a moment and tried to comfort her, but she seemed like she was afraid of something. With her tail still tucked between her legs, she pushed herself in between my legs as I stood up. It was after seeing how timid and odd Cassie was acting that I decided that I may be misreading the situation and I might need to get into the house. My dad was surely a prankster, but when he was caught, he was caught. He never drug things out once we caught on. He would come out and say something like, "I guess you kids ain't as gullible as you used to be. I'm gonna have to start stepping it up a notch." Dad didn't drink much, and never got drunk really, but I couldn't think of what the root of this odd behavior could possibly be, and it really started to weird me out. I made one last attempt at communication. "Dad, I know you're there. I saw you when I pulled in the driveway. The jig is up. What are you doing out here?" No response. I started around the front of my truck to round the vehicles and walk over to him. Cassie began to panic and whimper loudly, still glued to the inside of my ankles, crouched to the gravel with her head darting back and forth wildly. I stopped in front of my truck. I stand there for another moment in silence, waiting for something but not sure what, and then announce, "Well, I'm heading in. See you in a bit." I turned to walk to the front porch, unconsciously building speed as I hit the first step. Cassie drops back and doesn't follow me onto the porch, but seems to sort of stand guard at the foot of the steps. Keys in hand, I'm already searching for the deadbolt key. Panic is building in my chest, but I'm not sure why. I hurriedly unlock the door and jump into the house, swing around and slam the door behind me, locking the deadbolt all in one fluid motion. From behind me, I hear a voice yell, "What the hell?" I spin around. My big gulp drops to the floor and explodes across the living room floor. There sits my dad, in his underwear, sitting up from a deep sleep in his recliner. I begin to hyperventilate and yell through gasps of air that there is a man in the driveway hiding behind the van. I thought he was you. I was talking to him, Dad. I nearly collapsed into the floor. Within 15 seconds, my dad is running out the back door of the house with a spotlight and a handgun, still wearing nothing but his underwear. He was outside for what felt like forever. When he came in, he was pale as a sheet. He said someone was definitely out there, but he couldn't see them. He could hear them running, but when he pointed the spotlight in the direction of the footsteps, there was no one there. Crazy thing is, our trailer sat at the front of a 150-acre cornfield, and it was off-season, so everything was tilled down to the dirt. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. It was a terrifying experience, and I know it's one that seems easy to explain. My brain really wants to tell me that I had just foiled a car thief or something, or maybe even stopped a possible home invasion. The thing is, though, my dad has an unmistakable posture, and an even more unmistakable walk. I know those were his boots I saw under the van. I also know that if he had somehow set all this up, I would have heard about it for years, because it would have been one of his favorite stories to tell, how he scared me so bad when I was 17, and how funny it would have been. He does tell people about this from time to time, but he always ends with the same detail. That it wasn't until he was outside running around in his underwear with a handgun that I realized that Cassie had been sleeping in the floor next to his recliner when I ran in the door.